Welcome to the Tough Decisions Network for Entrepreneurs. I'm Dan Handford, and my wife, Dennae, and I interview successful people sharing stories behind tough decisions that they've had to make along their journey as an entrepreneur. Before we get started, let's hear from one of our sponsors. Have you ever thought about investing in real estate, but find yourself so busy that you don't have time for it? Do you have FOMO, which is the fear of missing out? At HandfordCapital.com, we help investors with passive real estate investments that project better returns than traditional investment vehicles such as the stock market. If you'd like to find out more about our passive real estate investments, visit HandfordCapital.com. That's HANDFORD Capital.com. We will jump on a call with you to discuss your investment goals and to see if our investments are a good fit for you. This advertisement is not to be construed as an offer or recommendation to buy or sell a security. Visit HandfordCapital.com.
Welcome to the Friday edition of the Tough Decisions podcast. This is your hosts, Dan and Dennae. We are talking about hiring the right employee in your business. And last Friday, we spent some time discussing some of the ways that we use to find qualified candidates. And so this week, we want to talk about how to get those right candidates to an interview. That may sound kind of simple, but if you've ever tried to hire on any kind of scale, you understand that that can be a challenge in and of itself. So let's discuss some of the ways that we use to get people to an interview.
Obviously, when you're putting an ad out for a job or a position in your company, and you're going to get inundated with several hundred types of resumes and applications of various people trying to submit to be a part of your team. And so make sure that you go back to last week's episode, because we talked about how to whittle those leads or those prospective employees down so you're not spending too much time just chasing a bunch of rabbits down a hole and not being able to find the right person. So it allows you to be able to weed out several people. So go back and listen to that episode. It'll be very helpful to you. So we're going to dive into this. And so, Dennae and I have quite a bit of experience hiring people and trying to find the right team. And we have a really good team right now as it is with our medical practices that we have. We have 5 of them here in South Carolina. And we're right now in the middle of a hurricane coming through, Hurricane Florence. So we're going to be hunkering down here the next couple of days along the coastline. And, we're in Columbia, South Carolina, so we're not in the direct path of it, but we will definitely get lots of wind and lots of rain and probably lose power for a couple of days. So anyway, so let's dive right into this. The first part of this is going to be trying to get them on the phone with you to try to do a quick interview before you spend too much time with them.
Right. So one of the things that we always like to do is actually talk to the person on the phone. And this is not always as important for some positions, but for a lot of the positions that people are going to be looking for, they're going to want to hear how that person is going to talk on the phone. So obviously, the first step might be just to give them a phone call from their resume, but maybe you want to send them an email and have them actually set up an appointment with you. So this is a good idea because one, you put the ball back in the court of the person who's applying for the job, and that allows you to see what kind of motivation and what kind of desire they actually have to work for you. Remember, we actually mentioned last week about one of the issues being that, people just drop their resume as a, quote, candidate for positions that they may or may not be qualified for, just so they can fulfill the requirements to stay on unemployment. And you don't want to have to sift through that and waste your time. But if you put it back in their court and ask them to schedule a phone appointment with you, then that allows you to see exactly how motivated they are.
And one of the tools that we use to schedule these over-the-phone interviews is a software program online, it's web-based, called Calendly. We also use it for our podcast interviews and scheduling people because it is a lot to coordinate. And like Dennae just said, you want to put that ball back in their court to see, are they really that interested in getting to this interview and starting to work for your company? And so using Calendly allows you to select certain days or time slots that you would be available to do an over-the-phone interview. So I don't suggest taking a lot of time trying to pick up the phone and calling these people and trying to get them right then and there. It's best to schedule that time. It also allows you to determine, is this person able to hold an appointment? And so you can see how punctual they are. Did they try to call you? Or, if you're using a software like Zoom in connection with Calendly, you can even do more than just a phone interview. You can do a phone interview and then a video interview at the same time. And so you get to see, a lot of things about that person, and you're able to really kind of see, can they show up for an appointment and can they show up on time?
I think another additional benefit to doing the interview, this phone interview this way, and this may seem like a small thing, but I still think it's important, is, they have to take the extra step to follow the Calendly link, and they have to go through the process. And Calendly, if you've never used it, it's very, very simple. It's not hard at all. But you're going to sift through the handful of people that may or may not be able to follow simple instructions, and also figure out how to schedule via electronic link. Maybe they're, if you found them on Indeed or ZipRecruiter, maybe they're not keeping a close track on those emails. So you're going to find the people who just, signed up for a ZipRecruiter account but's not following up. You're going to weed through all of those people, and it's going to require minimal amounts of time from you, and you're going to put it all back on them.
And if you are having somebody that is having a lot of trouble trying to schedule through Calendly or some other software, it's going to be,
it's an omen of things to come.
Exactly. And we're in the technology age. We're in the technology an era, and we really need people that are savvy enough to be able to handle the onslaught of a lot of technology that's going to come their way when they come to work for our company, and I'm sure in yours as well.
Yeah, if they can't handle following a Calendly link, they're going to have a hard time learning your software. So you just consider that a sign that wasn't a good fit. Something else that we've done is having group interviews before we do individual interviews. And I think the benefit of this kind of depends on what position you're hiring for and how many people you have to sift through. But one thing that we've done is schedule one time where we send out maybe an email to 20 to 25 different people that look qualified, look like they might be a good fit. Send out 20 to 25 people, ask them to respond with an RSVP email letting us know that they will attend what we call a group interview. Now, the benefits of this are a couple. Number one, you can set aside one time slot and interview multiple people. The reason this is important is that, as we've discussed before, if you set aside, let's say you set aside one 30-minute time slot for one person, and that one person doesn't show up, then you've wasted 30 minutes. But if you set aside 30 minutes to interview 15 people really quickly and 3 of them don't show up, then you've still benefited from having those individuals in.
The best type of position is for this type of an interview, in my opinion, is one that is going to have a lot of interaction, whether it be an in-person customer service or salesperson or whatever the case is, and you can see how they interact in a group. And the group interviews that we do are kind of unique in the fact that they're not technically group interviews. So we bring everybody in at one time, say 8 o'clock in the morning. We like to have it as like a really early or really late because we want to see how well they are in trying to show up for that appointment and for that interview as well. But they all show up at the same time, and then they have a little sign-in sheet at our front desk that they'll sign in as they're coming in, and they'll be given an application when they come in. And so they fill out that application, and then as they're filling out the application, when they get finished, they'll turn it back in. And then usually around 8:05, 8:10, somewhere around in there, we will bring them all together in a room and do almost like a group presentation, if you will, about the company and about the position, so they understand really what the position entails. And I've had some people before walk out after that. You tell them who you are, what you're about, and if they don't line up with your values and your company goals, then let them walk out. I actually encourage them to. I just say, if you don't like what I was talking about, you don't like what we're doing here at the company, then please don't stay. Don't waste my time or your time going forward any further. But after about that 5 to 7 minute introduction about the company and the position, we'll take them back into a room privately, one-on-one, and ask them some very specific questions. And we want to see how they are responding to those questions and how they're able to articulate words. And we don't really talk a lot about their background and their experiences. Most of it is really just kind of geared towards kind of get them to kind of see how they're able to communicate.
Yeah, the biggest thing that we're looking for is, number one, how they're dressed, what kind of eye contact they make when they're carrying on a conversation with us. And then we always like to ask them at least one question about the information that we gave them to get at the beginning, because we want to see whether they were just sitting there glossy-eyed and nodding their head, or whether they were actually thinking about and processing the information, and do they remember anything. And we're not expecting any, great detail or discourse on the information, but did they actually grasp and understand the big idea of what we talked about in the group. A couple of other things about this type of interview anyone who is late to this interview does not get to stay. And that sometimes can be a little bit of a tricky thing, but we always had somebody at our front desk. And when the time came for the group interview to get started, no one else was allowed to get an interview after that point.
And we made that very clear. I mean, so when these people walked in, that sign-in sheet was pulled, they were turned away. And I don't care what excuse they have. I mean, we didn't care if it was because they couldn't find the place, they got lost, traffic, whatever. I want somebody that knows how to navigate all of that. If you are scheduling for an interview, you should go try to find that place if you're not comfortable with the area before, like the night before, trying to find that place. Don't try to figure out how to do that the day of. And that's the kind of thing that frustrates me. And yes, you can have a lot of excuses. Oh, maybe our instructions weren't right. Well, then you should have figured that out the day before. You shouldn't be just showing up at our interview 10 minutes late because you got lost or there was traffic or whatever the case is.
Right. Now, then the last thing that we use is obviously a one-on-one interview. So, after they've navigated the group interview, if you still have a couple of candidates that, you want to pursue, then we bring them in for a longer one-on-one interview. And that's really where we do more of the, looking into who this person is. Are they qualified? Is what on their resume actually line up with their experience? We've found before, where what they put on their resume is technically correct, so they weren't lying, but the experience doesn't actually line up with what's on there. And that's all things that you can find out in a sit-down interview. And again, you want to put the ball in their court because you want to see and find out exactly how motivated this person is to work with your company. If they're not 100% on board and wanting that job, then you're wasting your time, and you want to know that before you bring them on and spend the money and the energy to train them and get them on board.
One other thing I wanted to touch on the group interviews is that each one of those group interviews, you might have 10, 15, 20 people coming in. You're not sitting down and spending half an hour with each one of them. It's a rapid fire group interview. So you're bringing them back one by one. And I tell them in that introduction, I say, now, today's interview is not going to be your typical group interview. We're going to bring you back one by one and ask them some very specific questions in the order in which you came in. So they have that sign-in sheet so we know in what order they were coming in. And we do a very short 2 to 3 minute interview. And I tell them that. That way they're not worried when they're only in there for 2 minutes and everybody else is thinking that they failed the interview or whatever. And so I tell them up front it's going to be 2 to 3 minutes. We rapid fire through them. You can get through them in 20, 30, 45 minutes depending on how many people are there. And it really helps to speed that process up and see a lot of people at one time.
Yeah, and one other thing I was going to mention about the group interviews a minute ago is don't worry about having 20 or 25, even 30 people RSVP for this group interview, because based on experience, I can tell you not even a small fraction of those people are actually going to show up. So, don't be concerned, where are we going to put all these people? I would say a good turnout rate would be 50%. That would be really good. From our experience, I'd say that the actual turnout rate is probably more like 25 to 30%.
Yeah, that's what I would say. I was thinking about 20 to 30%. But you're right. You definitely want to overfill this group interview because you don't want to have blocked off an hour and because you scheduled, 10 people, you get 2 or 3 people to show up. You want to have, 20, 30, 40 people registered for it, and you'll have a good 10, 15, or 20 people showing up for that group interview. So back to the one-on-one interviews, we've already touched on that a little bit. Once you've called them and you want to bring them back in, I would suggest getting them to a one-on-one in-person interview. And again, you can go back and use Calendly again, and Calendly is set up so that you can schedule it you can have different schedules or different time spots for the one-on-one in-person interviews. And again, it just makes it a lot easier. And like Dennae was saying earlier, it puts that ball in their court so that they can be the ones that are now taking the initiative and scheduling that interview.
All right, so there's some ideas for you on once you find the right person or once you have found some qualified people and you want to start the interview process. That gives you a place to go. Group interviews, a lot of times those are for entry-level positions and positions where you might have lots of qualified people that you need to sift through quickly. And then, of course, the one-on-one interview, but always putting the responsibility on that person to schedule and pursue the position, I think is always a good thing because that's why you're going to make sure that person really wants your job.
And next Friday, we're going to be going over the third topic in this series of hiring the best candidates for your company. So it's going to be called Things to Look For in a Resume. And so stay tuned next week as we go through the last part in this series of hiring. Thank you for listening to the Tough Decisions Network. Be sure to visit toughdecisions.net to gain access to show notes for this episode and to join our free weekly entrepreneur email where we will send you news about the latest technology for your business, inspiring quotes, and the latest books for entrepreneurs. That's toughdecisions.net.